The Empress Dowager was very much part of the school textbook because she was this formidable woman. She ruled China for decades, but her reputation was bad. She was always cast as the villain. So my earlier memory, I can't remember exactly which moment, but it must be in sort of some history lessons when she was this villain. Well, I think the most important thing about the Empress Dowager Cixi is her achievement, that she was the person who transformed medieval China into a modern society. She was the concubine who launched the modern China. It's also amazing that she made all the incredible transformations and the real revolution of 20th century China without much bloodshed, with astonishingly little bloodshed. She was not a cruel person by nature, but of course she grew up, she was born in this medieval society, and she was also capable of immense ruthlessness. I wrote Wild Swans because my mother came to London to visit me in 1988. And for the first time, she told me the stories of her life, the stories of my grandmother, my father. And while I was listening to her, I thought, I've got to write all this down. And that's how I started writing Wild Swans in 1988. And then I became a writer thanks to the success, or what you might say, of Wild Swans. And then Mao then seemed to be the natural next subject because he dominated my earlier life, and I had so many questions. I wanted answers about him, and writing a biography is the best way to find out about him and to get my questions answered. So I wrote the biography of Mao, and then after Mao, then the Empress Dowager became a natural subject. I first got interested in her when I was researching Wild Swans, and I realized to my astonishment that foot binding was not banned by the communists as the propaganda would have us to believe, but it was banned by the Empress Dowager. And then I was researching my biography of Mao. Again, I was astonished by the kind of freedom and opportunities Mao enjoyed in his early years, which was under the Empress Dowager. And Mao was a peasant lad, but he had opportunities to get scholarships, to go to college, to go abroad if he wanted to. He could write for a very free press on whatever subject he wanted to write, and he could travel with girlfriends, checking into the hotels, and the kind of sexual and intellectual freedom which I couldn't dream of having when I was growing up under Mao. So I was also quite fascinated by the Empress Dowager. And then of course I knew, and then I realized that today is still the case, that she is still cast as the villain. And the difference from her reputation, if you go on the web, or you Google her, or you see what's been written about, you get a completely different picture from just a little bit of research I have done. And then I got interested because I wanted to write something new. I wanted to write something other people haven't written about. I like to do historical detective works. I like to get to the bottom of things, to find out the truth. And research gives me enormous pleasure. I mean, you know, researching Mao with my husband for 12 years actually were the most riveting 12 years. But we had a lot of problems. You know, we had to dig out every bit of information because Mao is still revered or in China today. In fact, the regime wanted to go back to Mao's days. I mean, it won't happen, but at but Mao, there was a lot of cover up about Mao. And so it made the work all the more interesting. With the Empress Dowager, the research is much easier because a lot of the archives are open, and the contemporary writings about her, diaries, courtiers' diaries, correspondence, the imperial decrees, which are digitalized. So the research is relatively easy about her, and it's also fascinating because I just love writing about a woman. I mean, she was, apart from her great political achievement, she was also a woman of a wide range of interests. She bred dogs, you know, the Pekingese dog. She tamed birds which could fly onto the tip of her finger, the tips of her fingertips when she whistled a bird song. And she designed gardens, she designed interiors, she designed clothes, she made her own costumes, perfume. She became an accomplished painter, and she transformed the Peking opera from a kind of a peasant art form into the national opera of China. So she was amazing to write about, and also many dimensions about her. This robe, for example, is from the Empress Dowager's time. It's not that I collected, I was given this, along with a few other robes, by an Italian lady who loved wild swans and wanted to give me something to show. I'm very, very lucky. Her family did silk business with China at the Empress Dowager's time. So they had these robes, but of course they were never worn. They were packed and put at the bottom of the trunks, and never saw the light, which is why they're so well preserved. And I just love these things, this sort of China that has disappeared. Beautiful clothes and ancient civilization. You know, the Empress Dowager was a modernizer, but she didn't want to bulldoze Chinese culture. She didn't want to get rid of Chinese culture altogether. She wanted to try her best to preserve the Chinese culture. She only she only did what she judged to be the absolute necessary. You know, unlike you know, today's modernization, which is just almost like a summary destruction of the old China. She launched women's liberation. She banned foot binding. She released women from their homes and dismantled male-female segregation. She gave women education and sent them abroad. You know, all that amazing achievement. I mean, she was really she was the patron or the pioneer, you know, whatever you call it, of women's liberation in China. You know, at the beginning of the 20th century, under her, people were declaring that the 20th century China is going to be the China of women's rights, 女权. in those in Chinese. I just find that quite amazing. By the way,
Yes.
she was also China's first film producer.
Was she?
China made its first film in 1905. She had her pictures taken in 1903, and the photographer then kept the negatives on a glass plate, but sent her the prints. And in the prints, all the wrinkles were erased, bags disappeared. I mean, she looked like a woman of 30 or 40. And she was, of course, thrilled. She had these pictures blown up and colored and hung on in her palace. And so she liked the film studio, the photo studio very much, of course, for these pictures. So she invited the studio man to come into the court. The studio man wanted to be a filmmaker. So he came into the court and made the first film with a Peking opera star whose biggest fan was the Empress Dowager. And so she put these two together and they made the first film in China in 1905.